2208 release of SAP S/4HANA Cloud is finally upon us. As usual, it comes with hundreds of new scope items, features, functions, changes, enhancements across all lines of business. In my personal favorite, supply chain, and to be more specific, transportation management, SAP has now achieved another milestone. With the availability of air transportation mode planning capabilities directly in the SAP S/4HANA Cloud Core, you can now plan your transportation requirements across all modes of transport, be it sea, air, or land. In addition, transportation management has seen some of its integration scenarios being enhanced with new capabilities that offer you an enhanced intimacy with your carriers, your freight forwarders, as well as the ability to receive messages in near real time directly from the supply chain, allowing you to understand what is happening in your supply chains within the four walls of your organization, but beyond as well. So without further ado, let's just jump into this recording where we are going to cover this new air transportation mode. And also we will touch on the integration to dangerous goods, as we will be transporting a dangerous goods classified product. And we will also demonstrate the EDI capabilities for your carriers, freight forwarders, to confirm those freight bookings that you've sent them, as well as confirm the dates of the transportations, and also the ability to receive events to update your freight orders or freight bookings in an unattended, automated way.
As usual, before we jump into the system, let's look at what it is that we are trying to achieve from a theoretical point of view. What we will try to demonstrate is that we have a customer that is located in Germany that is going to be sending us a purchase order to our headquarters, to our offices located in Palo Alto, in San Francisco, in California. And once we have received that customer purchase order, the first point in this process that we will demonstrate will be the creation of a sales order to reflect the fact that we have received this customer's purchase order. Once the sales order is created and saved, the freight unit building rule will then kick in and produce for us what we call the freight unit, which is obviously going to be the basis for us being able to do transportation planning in S/4HANA Cloud. As a first step, the freight unit is going to be planned onto the new object, which is the air freight booking, which is going to serve as a liaison document with the freight forwarder. The freight booking will hold basic information such as the product, the weight, the dimensions pertaining to the cargo that we're asking to have transported, as well as the source and destination locations and some dates that we will be sending off to the freight forwarder. We will be sending this information via EDI to the freight forwarder, and it will be up to the freight forwarder to organize the door-to-door move, i.e. from our distribution channel in Palo Alto all the way to the customer in Germany. It will be the freight forwarder's responsibility to rely on his network of airlines, carriers that he has at his disposal to negotiate and liaise with the various carriers to organize the move. So he will be contacting a carrier in the US to organize the move from RDC to the closest airport. He will also be liaising with an airline to organize for the cargo to be airlifted from the US to Germany. And he will also liaise with a carrier in Germany to organize the last mile transportation from the airport to the customer location. Once the freight forwarder has finalized and organized the various players that will transport the goods from the US to Germany, the freight forwarder will then send us back a confirmation reflecting the fact that he accepts taking on this particular transportation request, but also sending us a confirmation code as well as the names or codes of the carriers, the dates at which he will be coming in to our DC to pick up the goods, and also provide us information pertaining to the cargo cutoff date, i.e. the date by which the cargo has to be at the airport in order to be processed in time and put onto the airplane so that it meets the customer requested delivery dates and times. So he will send us this information back to us, which is going to update the freight booking with all of this information. Once we know who the carriers are going to be at the pre-carriage and the on-carriage leg, We will then be able to, in the system, create what we call the pickup freight order. So that's to organize the road transportation from our DC to the source airport, as well as the delivery freight order to organize the on-carriage from the destination airport in Germany to the final destination at the customer location. Once that is settled, we will then be able to generate the outbound delivery, which will be the start of the warehousing activities. From a warehousing point of view, they will need the outbound delivery in order to generate the pick list, i.e. to know where to go in the warehouse and what items they are supposed to pick. They will then also perform the packing and loading. The loading, of course, will be done onto the truck of the US carrier that has been subcontracted to carry the goods from RDC all the way to the airport. This is the pre-carriage leg. Once the goods have departed from our location, we can already at this point generate the billing document that will be sent onto the customer. Meanwhile, the carrier will be transporting the goods to the airport, where it's likely that additional activities unbeknownst to us will happen, such as the loading of our parcel onto a ULD or consolidation of freight from other suppliers going to Germany as well, but organized through our freight forwarder and this airline. Then once the aircraft takes off, it's what we call the uplift, meaning that aircraft has taken off, which will signal the fact that the goods have left the continental United States of America. At this point, we will then be able to also generate on our side the freight cost accrual, so post the accrual, which in turn and seamlessly is going to also generate the service purchase order, perform the service entry sheets, which are the prerequisites for us being able to accommodate the incoming invoice that will be coming in from the freight forwarder, asking us to pay for the transportation of the goods that we've asked to be sent from the US to Germany. I've indicated here that the freight forwarder would be sending us the supplier invoice at this point in time, but it does not necessarily mean that in real life that this is the time at which the supplier would be sending us this invoice. The goods will then appear or arrive in Germany at the airport, where there are likely going to be some offloading, deconsolidation activities, and then the parcel will be handed over onto the German carrier that will organize for the transportation of our cargo from the German airport of Frankfurt all the way to the customer end location and hand the goods over to the final customer. So from a logistics point of view, this is what the process is going to look like, and these are the various steps that we'll be looking at to perform in the system. Another thing that we also will be looking at opportunistically will be the simulation of events coming in from the supply chain. Of course, all of the events such as departure, pickup, check-in, check-out can be recorded into the system manually, but the maximum value that you would get out of the solution would be if you are integrated with your carriers and you are able to get those messages in near real time through digital channels that update your system automatically. So typically here we could have some events that pertain to the arrival of the carrier at our DC to pick up the goods. We could record the check-in, check-out, loading, offloading of the goods, and then of course throughout the supply chain keep track of where our cargo is, so that we also have visibility on where our cargo is with regards to that particular move from RDC to the customer location. So now that we've set the scene, let's just jump into the system and see how this process is going to unfold. The process will begin with the creation of a sales order, of which we have already fast-tracked its creation. However, let's go into it to look at the important details contained within it. Firstly, we have the shipping condition, which in this case indicates that the sales order is going to be planned with transportation management. And secondly, it also tells the system that the ensuing freight unit will be planned within SAP S/4HANA Cloud with basic transportation management. We can also see that our customer is based in Germany. Importantly as well is that we have selected an appropriate Incoterm, which in this case DDP, Delivery Duty Paid. If we delve into the details of the item, what we can see here is that we have also already indicated the shipping type as being airplane. If we go down to the status and blocks part of the material, we can here see that this item is a dangerous goods and that the dangerous goods status has been flagged appropriately for this material in this order. If we go back to the header of the sales order and look at the process flow, we have the entire genealogy of that sales order up to this point. So we can see that from our sales order, a freight unit building rule kicked in and produced this one single freight unit, which we will now go on to plan in the SAP Transportation Cockpit. Once in the Transportation Cockpit, we can select a pre-saved search that is going to bring in fields and layouts that are relevant to the scenario that we're going to be looking at, which is the planning of an air transportation. So to this effect, we have indicated the transportation mode 05 air for the freight unit stages section. We've also indicated the source location as our distribution center, and we will change the field here to be that of our freight unit, which is the one that we produced off our sales order. Note here that we have selected a page layout that is appropriate for air transportation. We'll click on continue. Because this is an air scenario, we do not have the requirement to have the truck resources in the bottom left quadrant of our screen. To plan this booking, we could have done it in different ways. We could have created an air booking here and then drag and drop the freight unit into the air booking. We could also have created from the app Manage Air Freight Bookings directly a booking and added the freight unit directly into it. So different ways to produce the same result. In this case, what we will do is we will simply select our freight unit. We'll click on Create Capacity Document, which obviously is proposed by default as an air freight booking, seeing as we are in the air freight scenario. As per usual, we have a ensuing transportation document that has been created, but is given this $1 temporary assignment number. We'll click on Save, and this will produce a definitive freight booking. We can click on this number to actually drill down into this freight booking. In the freight booking, we will flip to edit mode as we need to add additional information. And what we can see is that the movement type is door to door, meaning that it will be from the door of my distribution center through to the door of the customer location. But it could also be a variant of that, which could be door to port, port to door, or only port to port. But then, of course, depending on which movement type you have selected, you might have the additional onus of having to plan, in addition to that, yourself, the carriage from your door to the airport or from the airport to your customer door. The next information we're going to indicate here is the carrier. Now, this is an air freight booking, so whilst the indication here says carrier, what we are really going to indicate here is the freight forwarder, because as I said, it is the freight forwarder that we are going to entrust the transportation of this transport to. So I put in the code for the freight forwarder. We can see we will then also enter the purchasing organization and the purchasing group, which will represent the organization responsible for this particular freight booking. In terms of information, what we can also see is that obviously the freight unit is already there, because that was the basis for the creation of the freight booking in the transportation cockpit. And because we selected a door-to-door movement type, we can see that we have 3 legs. So the pre-carriage from the distribution center to our location, the main carriage, which will be from the airport in the US to the airport in Germany, and then the on carriage, which will be from the airport in Germany through to the customer end location. As we can see, we don't have any information here pertaining to the executing carriers, nor the airports that this cargo will transit through, as this is information that the freight forwarder is going to send to us when he confirms having taken on this particular freight booking. So now that we've indicated all the information that we really have to indicate in the air booking, the next thing we will do is to click the subcontracting and send the booking, so that an EDI message can be sent to our carrier asking him if he wishes to take on this particular transportation. And we will then expect from him to either confirm or reject this particular booking. So we will click on send booking. We will acknowledge our desire to send this booking. And this booking has now been sent via EDI to our carrier. What we can also see is if we go to the communication history, is see that an outbound EDI message has gone out to the TM freight forwarder. We can further drill down into the details of this particular message if, for example, we wanted to see the content of the XML payload. So here you have the entire XML message if you wanted to double check a few things, such as here, for example, we can see that we have also notified the freight forwarder that this particular transport will contain dangerous goods. You can also, for the sake of visibility, click on display in a new window, and this will open up a new browser window showing the entire content of the payload in a more readable format. And if we drill down to the appropriate section, we can see that the applicable compliance regulations have also been indicated. So we have the 49 CFR, which will cover the American road transportation leg from RDC to the airport. We can also see that the applicable norms have been included in the message, which in this case is the UN 3481 lithium-ion batteries, as the good that we are sending to this customer is a laptop that includes a lithium-ion battery. So we will close this message. We will go back to our freight booking, and what we now need to do is simply wait for the freight forwarder to arrange for this transportation with various carriers and confirm that he's accepting this particular transport. Now that the freight forwarder has had time to negotiate with carriers and organize the transportation of the goods, the next step is to await the confirmation that he will be sending to us via, again, an EDI message. So for that, we will be using Postman as usual to mimic the sending of this EDI message. Here we can see we have prepared a payload that is going to send the, as we can see here, the airport codes through which our cargo is going to transit through, as well as the carrier codes that he has selected that also exist in my system for the execution of the road and air transportation. So let's go ahead and click on send. We can see that the payload has been accepted by S4HANA Cloud, but again, it doesn't mean that the payload is error-free. We go back into TM, and what we will do here is we will click on refresh, and some of the things that we can look out for would be, for example, the airway bill as well as the dates, which should hopefully get populated if the message is correctly processed. So let's go ahead and click on refresh, and we can see that the freight booking has now been updated with the information that came in from the freight forwarder. So if we open up the screen again here a little bit, and if we go to the communication history once again, we can see that we've had an inbound document that came in, and just like the outbound confirmation request we sent earlier on, we can see that we have the XML payload that we can potentially look at if we wanted to look at some of the details that were sent. If we go back to the general data tab of our freight booking, in terms of information, what we can obviously see are the dates and times that have been filled. So I now have knowledge of when the carrier will be coming to my DC to pick up the goods. I can also see whether the date that was requested by the customer has been accepted or not, which would then also in turn allow me to advise the customer of any delays should there be a need to do so. We can see the airports through which the cargo is going to transit through. So we will see that it's going to leave the US via San Francisco and land in Germany at Frankfurt. We can also see the cargo cutoff date, which is usually 24 hours before the departure date. So that's the date by which the cargo must be presented to the airline. And then also here we have the availability information so that the carrier knows from what time he can show up at the airport in Germany to pick up the goods. In terms of other information, what we can also see here is obviously the executing carriers that have been indicated. So we have the carrier code for the American carrier that will perform the transportation via road from my DC to the airport. We also have the code of the freight carrier that will do the road transportation in Germany from the airport to the customer location, as well as the airline, the cargo airline that has been selected by the freight forwarder to perform the air transportation part of the process. An important aspect as well that is included and shown here is the invoicing. we can see here that the invoicing of each of the stages will be done by the header carrier, in other words the freight forwarder. So the freight forwarder will present me one consolidated invoice for the transportation from the US MyDC to the customer location. The invoicing could also have been done at a stage level. So if we flip to edit, just to have the values showing up, as you can see here, we could have selected a stage carrier if we had wanted to have a separate invoice being sent from this carrier, or we could also have indicated no settlement at all. Now that we've received all of this information, the system has also obviously been able to calculate the charges, and if we go to the charges tab, we can drill down and look at all the charges that make up this particular transportation, which is a mixture of pickup charges, delivery charges, airway bill charges, fuel surcharges, customs, insurance, dangerous goods, and so on and so forth. So again, highlighting the rich flexibility that exists to really create all the charge types that you would need to be able to rate such a transport. We can also see that the total amount has been determined as shown here. So now that we have all of the information from the carrier, the next thing that we need to do is to create the pickup and the delivery freight orders. So for that, we go to the freight booking item, we pick the product line item, and from here we will select the drop down create and say create the freight order for pickup. We can see here that the pickup freight order number has temporarily been assigned. We will do the same thing for the delivery, so that's for the on carriage leg in Germany, and again we also see here a temporary number has been assigned to that freight order. We'll click on save to commit those numbers to the database, and we should have a permanent freight order number coming up, as we can see here. What we can also do, obviously from here, is drill down to those road freight orders. So if we look at the pickup freight order, we can see that the pickup freight order is already coming in pre-filled with much of the information that came in from the freight booking. Noticeably, we can see the locations, which is from RDC to the airport. We can also see that the details regarding the carriers have been copied, and you might see here that what we see as the carrier code is not the carrier but that of the freight forwarder. If we want to see the actual executing carrier, what we can do is we can go to the Business Partners tab, and we will see here that the executing carrier, which was the carrier sent to me by the freight forwarder, has been copied as a business partner function as the executing carrier in my pickup freight order. A similar phenomenon would have happened on the delivery freight order in Germany. And as per usual, we can also see that the business technology platform distance calculation service has kicked in and determined that the distance from my location to the airport is about 45 kilometers. Also note that from a charges calculation point of view, this pickup freight order has no charges, as the rating has already been done in the freight booking for this particular pre-carriage leg. And if we look at the output request tab of the freight order, because we are transporting a dangerous good, we can see that we also have a dangerous goods note that has been produced, which we can also display. And as you can see here, we have the references of those dangerous goods information. So for the US only, the CFR 49 norm, and the UN 3481 that indicates the kind of dangerous goods that we are transporting here. We now go back to the freight booking, and the next step is to initiate the creation of the deliveries so that the warehouse can take over their responsibility by performing the picking of the goods and making them ready for pickup and loading when the truck from the carrier arrives at our location. So back in the freight booking, we go to create the deliveries. The system advises us that a delivery has been created. And if we go to the document flow tab of our freight booking, we can actually see the entire genealogy of documents up to this point. We have our sales order, we have the outbound delivery that we have just created, the freight unit that was created from the sales order, we have the overarching freight booking document, as well as the two freight orders that were created for pickup and delivery of the goods. The next step is for the warehouse to perform its activities, which will consist usually of picking, maybe packing, and then doing the loading of the truck when the truck arrives. For the sake of fast-tracking this whole process, we will do everything in one go, meaning that we will do the picking as well as the goods issue right away, although realistically the picking would be done separate from the goods issue, which would happen later on, quite possibly after the truck has gone, or at the same time as the loading actually happens onto the truck. So this is the delivery that we had created of our freight booking. We can see that it has yet not been picked, nor has it yet been goods issued. We will simply click on pick to enter the picking screen, and here we will confirm the picking quantity, and we will save the delivery with the picking information, and now tells us that the picking status is completely processed. So obviously at this point the warehouse would go on to do the actual picking, and we can see that this has been completely processed, and the next step is to confirm that the picked quantity corresponds to the requested quantity. So once again we would select our outbound delivery. We would this time say post the goods issue, which is obviously then also going to affect the stock by decrementing it by the quantity that has been picked and goods issued. And we can see that our outbound delivery now is completely processed from a picking and a goods issue point of view. But as I said, usually the goods issue would be disconnected from the picking. We now fast track back to the pickup freight order. So this is where the US carrier will show up at my distribution center coming to collect the goods that we want to expedite. Before we do that, we obviously need to set the freight order to a status that will allow for transactions to be handled on it. So we will go into our freight order, we'll click on edit to be able to change its status, and we will set execution status as ready for transport execution. We will also indicate the information pertaining to the vehicle. So for example, we will say that the carrier advised that he would come with a small vehicle, and the registration of it would be obviously US based, and it would be US as an example. We will now save this freight order and is ready to receive transactional information on it. In terms of life cycle for this particular freight order, different things are going to happen, noticeably from a execution status point of view. So if we go down to the stages tab, we will have the ability to set a number of execution statuses at the source and destination location to reflect the progress from a logistical point of view of the truck arriving, being checked in, being checked out, departing from our location, and then quite possibly we could also be receiving event messages coming in through from our carrier via digital channels such as EDI to advise us of the continued progress of this particular piece of cargo beyond the four walls of our organization. To do this, we will also use Postman to see how you could leverage EDI messaging from your carriers to actually update those statuses in your freight orders or freight documents, more generally speaking, be it freight orders or freight bookings, as communication scenarios exist to cater for the receipt of messages for both of these documents, freight orders and freight bookings. Once again, we will be using Postman to simulate the incoming EDI message to notify us that the carrier has arrived at our distribution center. So here we have our payload. We will click on send, which again has been accepted. We flip back to our TM system. We'll click on refresh. We can see that we have received an inbound message telling us that the arrival at destination has occurred. And again, we can also go back to the communication history, and you can view the XML payload, which is the one that we had used here and sent to the S/4HANA Cloud system. For the sake of speed, we could continue posting all of these events with Postman, but we can quickly cycle through them, or at least the important ones, so that we can progress in the process. As you can see here, I'm now back in the air freight booking, and I can update the events in the individual freight orders and freight booking, but I can also command the update of the freight orders directly from the freight bookings. What I mean by that is if I flip to edit, I could, for example, in the freight booking report the fact that the truck driver has now checked in to the pickup freight order. I could then obviously put in the checkout, but what is important is the set to departed, as that is what will then allow me to post a accrual, and by posting the department, the other ones will automatically be posted as well. So I'm just going to quickly go and put set to departed, and we should see that the execution tab of the freight booking is going to get updated with events that are really applicable to the pickup freight order, and those events will also be visible on the pickup freight order. But on the freight booking, I will have the entire history of the booking being updated here, because this was a door-to-door move. So this has been set as departed. I can quickly cycle through and say that the truck has now also arrived at the airport, that he has been checked in, and as you can see, I cannot progress any further in the statuses for this particular stage at the airport. Reason for that being that the next statuses that I can update are on the main carriage. So if I now flip to the main carriage stage, so this would be events that are really applicable to the freight booking, I can go to execution status at source, and as you can see here, I have the continuation of the previous stage where I did the check-in. Here I can do the checkout and the departed as well. By putting in the status set to departed, that would be synonymous of the aircraft actually taking off. And as you can see here, we have a different window coming up, which is going to set a different execution status on the freight booking, which is to confirm that the uplift or the takeoff has occurred for that aircraft, and it'll be en route to Germany. We can amend the date, of course, or we can just accept it, which is what I will do, and I will say OK. So the freight booking is now departed. The aircraft has taken off. So we can imagine that it's flying across the Atlantic, and it's going to fly across Europe and land in Germany. So I continue the updates of my freight booking by going this time still on the stage, the main carriage stage, this time going to the execution status and setting it to arrived, meaning that my airplane has now arrived in Germany. So I know where my cargo is, and again I have the entire history of my cargo updated through events, as well as the respective time zones in my freight booking. I will say that it has been checked in, and as we had before in the previous pre-carriage stage, the next statuses that I can update will be on the last on-carriage stage. So I go to the execution status at source, and again I can check out to notify that the truck from the German carrier has now checked out of the airport, and it also has now departed the airport perimeter, and it's en route to the customer end location. So what we need to do now is simply set the final statuses for the final leg or the final stage of this entire trip, which is to say that the truck has arrived at the customer location. So I could now be reporting additional events such as the unloading, the handover of the cargo to the customer, and it's all now finished by saying that the truck has departed, so it has left the customer location. I know that my cargo has been safely handed over to the customer. Now that this freight booking is complete from a logistical point of view, the next step is to finalize this process with the financial execution part of it, which is going to encompass the posting of the accrual, which will in the background create a service purchase order, as well as process the entry sheet for each of the charges that will have been copied across from the booking to the purchase order. And then of course we will be ready to receive the invoice from the freight forwarder. So let's go ahead and post the accrual on this freight booking. So we are now in the monitor accrual postings application. What we will need to do is indicate our freight booking so we can see a little bit clearer that is output to us. We can see that this is our freight booking, and what we will do now is simply say confirm for posting. and we can see that our freight booking has moved from the for confirmation section to the posted section of this particular application. And if we drill down further into the document that has just been posted, if we click on it, we of course have the visibility of the charges that have been copied across from our freight booking. We can also look at the cost distribution to see the items to which the costs have been distributed to. And we have our freight booking, and already here we can see the logistical references to our outbound delivery, as well as the sales order, which is where the process started in the first place. If we look at the document flow, again we have the entire visibility of our freight booking, but we now also have the service entry sheet that has been added, which is where the goods receipt, against which the goods receipts were posted, which then obviously led us to having these charges being accrued. So there you go. I will not show the invoicing or the billing, as this is fairly straightforward, but this is the air door-to-door transportation scenario that is now available with SAP S/4HANA Cloud in basic transportation management.